Most people believe dogs can sense bad people through some mysterious sixth sense, as if they can read hidden energy the moment someone walks into a room. But science paints a far more fascinating picture. Your dog is not psychic, and they are not reading auras. What they are doing is running an incredibly advanced social analysis system that has been refined through thousands of years of living beside humans. The moment a stranger approaches, your dog begins collecting information faster than most people can consciously process it. First, they study body language. Dogs are extraordinarily sensitive to movement patterns, posture, and muscle tension. They notice whether someone walks confidently or hesitantly, whether their movements are smooth or unpredictable, whether their hands are relaxed or stiff. Even small shifts in weight distribution or subtle signs of nervousness create signals your dog immediately registers. At the same time, your dog's nose is analyzing chemical information invisible to humans. Changes in body chemistry caused by stress, fear, aggression, or anxiety release volatile compounds that dogs can detect instantly. To your dog, emotional states are not hidden behind polite smiles because scent reveals what the body is truly experiencing underneath. But perhaps the most important layer is social observation. Dogs constantly monitor the relationship between you and the stranger standing in front of them. They watch your tone of voice, your facial tension, your posture, and your emotional reactions. If you stiffen slightly, hesitate, or become uncomfortable, your dog notices. They have spent years studying your behavioral patterns and emotional rhythms, meaning even tiny disruptions become meaningful information. None of these signals alone can tell a dog whether someone is good or bad. But when body language, scent chemistry, emotional tension, and social observation combine together within seconds, they create the powerful illusion that dogs simply know things instinctively. In reality, your dog is not using magic at all. They are processing layers of social and biological data in real time, making rapid judgments based on trust, predictability, and emotional safety. What looks supernatural from the outside is actually the result of thousands of years of evolution, spent learning how to read human behavior better than almost any other species on Earth. In Heingenlermulam, Japanese researcher Akiko Takaoka conducted an experiment at Kyoto University that completely changed the way scientists understand trust in dogs. At first glance, the setup looked incredibly simple. A dog was placed in a room with two containers, while a human experimenter pointed toward one of them. Inside the chosen container was food, and naturally, the dog followed the gesture and found the reward. The process worked exactly as expected. The dog learned that the human pointing gesture was reliable information. But then the experiment changed. During the second round, the same experimenter pointed toward another container, and this time it was empty. The dog ran over expecting food, only to discover that the signal had been false. In human terms, it was a tiny lie communicated in the only language the dog fully understood: direction and guidance. Then came the third round, the moment that made the study unforgettable. The experimenter once again pointed toward a container that truly did contain food. The dogs clearly wanted the reward. They understood the gesture. They understood the game. Yet instead of immediately following the point like before, the dogs hesitated. Many simply stared at the experimenter and refused to move. Across the study, every single dog reacted the same way. Not most of them, all of them. After experiencing just one deceptive interaction, the dogs stopped trusting that specific person. What makes this finding so extraordinary is that the dogs did not become generally confused or fearful. They did not suddenly stop responding to pointing gestures altogether. In a second version of the experiment, a completely new person entered the room and pointed toward the correct container. Instantly, the dogs followed again without hesitation. Their trust in the act of pointing had not disappeared. Instead, they had mentally attached unreliability to one individual human being. That distinction is incredibly important because it reveals that dogs are not blindly obeying human commands. They are actively evaluating the reliability of the person communicating with them. The dogs remembered exactly who had misled them and adjusted their future behavior accordingly. Researchers believe this reaction is deeply connected to a dog's need for predictability and stability. Dogs evolved alongside humans for thousands of years, relying on consistent social signals to survive and cooperate. When a person behaves unpredictably, even in a simple experiment, it creates tension and uncertainty. The dogs were not making moral judgments about honesty in a human sense. They were protecting themselves from unreliable information. Akiko Takaoka later explained that she was surprised by how quickly the dogs devalued the reliability of a human after a single negative experience. That phrase perfectly captures what the study revealed. Dogs are constantly measuring trust, storing social memories, and using past experiences to decide who deserves their confidence in the future. One of the most emotional discoveries in canine psychology came from a study led by Hitomi Chijiwa at Kyoto University, because it revealed that dogs are not only paying attention to how humans treat them, they are also closely watching how humans treat the people they love. In the experiment, dogs observed their owners struggling to open a container while two strangers sat nearby. The owner then turned to one of the strangers for help. In some situations, the stranger willingly assisted the owner and helped solve the problem. In other situations, the stranger deliberately refused to help, turning away and ignoring the request completely. A second person remained neutral during the interaction and did nothing at all. After the scene ended, both strangers offered the dog a treat at the exact same time. The researchers carefully controlled the setup so neither person would accidentally influence the dog with eye contact, tone of voice, or gestures. The dogs were left to make their decision entirely based on what they had just witnessed. The results were remarkable. When the stranger had helped the owner, the dogs accepted treats from both people without much preference. But when the stranger had refused to help the owner, many dogs completely rejected the treat offered by that person and instead approached the neutral stranger. Think about what that means for a moment. The rude stranger had done nothing directly harmful to the dog. They had not touched the dog, threatened the dog, or taken away food. The dog simply watched someone behave negatively toward their owner and formed a social judgment based on that interaction alone. Scientists called this behavior third-party affective evaluation, meaning the dogs were evaluating human relationships from the outside rather than only reacting to direct personal experiences. At the time, this kind of social evaluation had rarely been documented outside primates, making the findings especially important. But the study revealed something even more fascinating. The dogs did not strongly reward kindness. Instead, they strongly punished unkindness. Helpful strangers received no major social bonus, but unhelpful strangers were clearly avoided. Researchers describe this as a negativity bias, a psychological tendency where negative actions carry more emotional weight than positive ones. From an evolutionary perspective, this makes perfect sense. Identifying dangerous or unreliable individuals is far more important for survival than rewarding generosity. For dogs living alongside humans, avoiding harmful social behavior may have been critical for safety and cooperation over thousands of years of domestication. The emotional impact of this study is powerful because it suggests dogs are deeply invested in the social world surrounding the humans they love. Your dog is not only bonding with you emotionally, they are quietly observing who supports you, who ignores you, and who creates tension around you. Even when they say nothing at all, they are paying attention. One of the most fascinating studies on canine intelligence came from researchers at the University of Vienna, who wanted to answer a question that almost sounds impossible at first. Can dogs tell the difference between someone who is honestly wrong and someone who is intentionally deceptive? To test this idea, scientists worked with hundreds of dogs using a simple but carefully designed experiment involving 2 buckets and hidden food rewards. In the setup, a treat was placed inside one bucket while a human observer watched. Then, in full view of the dog, another person secretly moved the treat into the second bucket. The critical detail was whether the first human witness actually saw the switch happen or not. In one version of the experiment, the human stayed in the room and watched the treat being moved, meaning they knew exactly where the reward really was. In another version, the human briefly left the room during the switch and genuinely did not know the treat had been relocated. Afterward, the same person returned and pointed toward the original bucket, which was now empty. From the dog's perspective, both situations looked almost identical. A human was pointing toward the wrong location, but the dogs reacted very differently depending on what they believed the human knew. When the person had witnessed the switch and still pointed toward the empty bucket, many dogs ignored the instruction and searched for the food themselves. However, when the person had not seen the switch and honestly believed the treat was still in the original location, the dogs were much more likely to trust the gesture and follow the pointing command. This distinction is extraordinary because it suggests dogs may not simply react to outcomes alone. Instead, they appear to evaluate intention. The dogs behaved as if they understood the difference between a person making an innocent mistake and a person deliberately giving false information. In other words, the dogs were not only processing behavior, but also attempting to interpret the mental state behind the behavior itself. Researchers also discovered that breed differences played an important role in how dogs responded to deception. Breeds historically developed for close cooperative work with humans, such as retrievers and border collies, performed especially well at identifying intentional deception. These dogs have spent generations evolving alongside humans in tasks that required careful attention to human communication, guidance, and emotional signals. Their survival and success depended heavily on reading people accurately. Terriers, however, reacted differently. Originally bred for independent hunting and decision-making, terriers were more likely to continue following deceptive pointing gestures even in situations where the human clearly knew the information was wrong. Rather than relying heavily on social evaluation, terriers seemed more comfortable investigating situations independently and making decisions on their own. This difference highlights how deeply selective breeding may have shaped canine social intelligence over centuries. The emotional impact of this study is profound because it suggests dogs may understand far more about human intention than we once imagined. They are not blindly obeying commands or mechanically responding to gestures. Instead, they appear to evaluate honesty, uncertainty, and reliability in ways that resemble surprisingly complex social reasoning. As compelling as these studies are, the science is not completely settled. In Heingenlair Heimwilum, another research team at Kyoto University published findings that complicated some of the earlier conclusions about how dogs judge human behavior. In this experiment, dogs watched people behave generously or selfishly toward another dog, yet afterward they showed little preference between the humans involved. The expected social judgment simply did not appear as strongly as previous studies suggested. Rather than disproving earlier research, however, the results may reveal something more specific about how canine social evaluation actually works. Dogs seem to react most strongly when a situation directly affects their own social world, especially their relationship with the humans they love and trust. When someone lies to the dog personally or treats their owner poorly, the signal becomes emotionally meaningful. But when the situation involves strangers or social dynamics disconnected from the dog's life, their response may weaken significantly. This helps explain why many dogs appear friendly toward almost everyone they meet. A sociable dog is not failing some hidden instinct test. In fact, most dogs naturally begin from a position of trust unless something specific causes concern. At the same time, sudden hesitation or discomfort around a particular person may still matter, because dogs are constantly monitoring patterns humans often overlook. They notice tension, inconsistency, emotional shifts, and unreliable behavior long before people consciously recognize those signals themselves. The most important conclusion is that dogs are not magical creatures reading invisible energy or human souls. What makes them remarkable is something far more real. For more than years, dogs evolved beside humans, learning to survive by understanding our emotions, behaviors, routines, and relationships. Over generations, they developed incredibly sophisticated systems for evaluating trust, safety, and social stability. Your dog is not reading minds. They are reading patterns, memories, reactions, and emotional connections built through thousands of years of living closely with people.